So welcome, team, as I bring you in. Wonderful to have you here. Dr. P, John, Gary, Drew, so great that you're part of this today. Really looking forward to hear from you, and I wanted to get straight into the discussion. And John, if you open up with that, please.
Walk
Just unmute.
Hi. So folks, it's a blessing here to be here today. Thank you, everybody who's joining and watching this and on the panel now. Today, we're going to go through the pre-Adamic age. Okay, we're going to go through the lens of the Babylonians and Egyptians and talk generally about the time before Adam, which is, as Dr. P said in the last show, and as Gary's written about, is a very it's untrodden territory for some people. And I'm hoping to shed some light on it today and have some good discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so into the slides, John.
Yep, let's go straight in. That'd be great. Okay, go to the next slide. That'd be great. And then, so basically, we've got two of the publishers here. Right. So for the sake of John North, I'm going to say this presentation is for teaching, educational purposes only. Not for profit, not for resale. All articles are clearly referenced. Okay, let's spin on to the next. So basically, the pre-Adamic age, times before our age. Okay, now as we go into the first slide, this is a slide that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Dr. P had quite a detailed session the other Thursday as well, which as a separate voice is always nice to hear when we start looking at the concept of ages. Okay, and frankly, I was called out 2017, and every year has been that year for me. So I've been waiting every year for the end of the age, right, since then. So I feel in my spirit that we're kind of close, and to put a line in the sand can be quite hard, but I thought it might be entertaining from a positive spiritual point of view today with the panel we have, just to recover that ground, if you don't mind, Dr. P. So as a starter point, right, when did the age start? You know, you could say, as we left the goat Aries and went into Pisces, the fish, would it be Yahushua's birth, 3 BC? Do you take it from his ministry date at the age of 30? Or do you take it from his crucifixion date, which is the final covenant? Now, obviously 2,000 years from his birth has gone past, right? From his ministry, you could say that could be it, but it's more likely from the covenant, and that's probably the age where we'd measure it from. Any comments, anybody?
I think I'll jump in, and
go for it.
You know, we want to be, and as you're covering off, we want to be careful not to get too stuck in on the date setting for the exact times, because there's a lot of unknowns and variables no matter how you sort of come at it.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I think we all kind of agree, or most of us would agree, I would think, that we're probably in the fig tree generation. And so the question is, when does that start? And it's interesting on the year 2017, because that's sort of lined up with the 10 Jubilees of the Jewish mystical sort of prophecy that begat the Messianic age for the mystical Jewish people. You know, 1967 is an interesting date too, because of Jerusalem and having the fig tree prophetic allegory to describe the southern kingdom back in control of not only just Jerusalem, but the covenant land, or at least a part of the covenant land, which is a requirement for the end time, might be a start date. And then we get into the ideology of, so those, I was just going to say 67 and 1917, they jive kind of well. And when you start to look at that sort of time frame, but we want to be careful because of that generation that's not sort of clearly defined in a number of years. So we have a range of 40 years for the fig tree generation. We have possibly 70 years, as the book of Psalms talks about. And you could also use Genesis 6:3, where life is limited to 120 years. And so, and it doesn't have to go a full generation. So, but what we do know for sure And I think you're bang on is that we are in the fig tree generation, and that things are lining up quite well for the age of Aquarius, for the polytheists and their destruction of fire that they want to bring about. And just as we have that destruction reserved for the end time, according to 2 Peter 3 and all of the descriptions of the end time that we get in the New and the Old Testament. So I think we're in that zone. I think we're in the sorrows, but as you say, is what will be the exacting sort of dates. The only next firm sort of thing that we might get is the last 7 years where would kick that off in Daniel 9:27. So somewhere between starting of the sorrows and Daniel 9:27 is where we are. There's a lot of things yet to be fulfilled, but things could happen rapidly, and we're starting to see things really heat up that could just turn things topsy-turvy, that could, get us into that zone into the 2030s or the 2040s, or it still may take a little bit longer than that. It's still up in the air, and although we can understand the time, we may not be able to exactly pick the exact sort of dates, because not even the sun knows what his time of the hour of the coming is. So there's a bit of ambiguity. It's obscure. I'm struggling with
That is obscure.
ambiguous.
Yeah.
So, but it's good to try and get it nailed down as close as we can. But I think we just want to be, as I caution people, we want to be careful not to lose our credibility. And also that's why I like the way you phrased it, John.
Yeah, but I think the other aspect is it's whether the end of the age equals the start of tribulation or not. Right? We might lose, man might lose his rights to things, and things might change on the planet a little bit, but it doesn't mean to say that's the exact start date or whatever. So that's kind of an interesting one. But
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
we're certainly in a threshold of things. Certainly, my father passed 2000, or my earthly dad passed 2014, and he would not recognise the planet now from when he left. So much has changed. Governments, with policy. At one point, Britain was known to, go around and mediate, try and work out solutions around the world, and we've done nothing but throw coals on the fire, frankly, the past 5 years, with every conflict, I think. Not to be political particularly, but you can see the state of the nations, and it's not great. Dr. P, I think you'd. Yeah.
Well, let's just say that I have a pretty wildly different kind of perspective on it. It's very interesting that when you talk about the flow of the Jubilees, for instance, one of the things we've been seeing recently is a calculation that's made from the Book of Jubilees. And these calculations are very interesting because really the center pin date, if you will, is a date that's given to us in the Book of Kings. And it talks about the time when Solomon completed his temple. And of course, this is interesting because, of course, we have a secular record, supposedly, that tells us the date of the completion of Solomon's temple. And then we can look backwards from that date to see when the Exodus was completed. And we know the Exodus was completed in reverse calculation on the first day of the 50th Jubilee. And it took them 10 days to cross the River Jordan. And when they took those 10 days to cross the River Jordan, which I think is kind of astounding, really, that it took 10 days, but there's a whole bunch of narrative there that they had to stop the water, that it was flood waters, and they had to block the waters, like similar to crossing the Sea of Reeds when they crossed. But nonetheless, this is corroborated in chapter 50 of the Book of Jubilees, and the first couple of chapters of the Book of Joshua. And so anyway, by putting all these dates together, we have been able to conclude, and using dates were also found in the Book of Numbers, we were able to conclude when the Exodus began, when it was completed, and then also calculate and pin the year of the 50th Jubilee, and thereby calculate where we are today. And again, this calculation uses the Jubilee formula, which is 49 years, and then the 50th year is the first year of the next calculation. So in other words, you would go 7 sevens, and then in the year 50, you're going to have a second year of Sabbath, a second sabbatical year, but that is the first year of the next count. So then you only go 5 years until you reach the next sabbatical year. 5 years of planting after that.
Basically.
So in that calculation, you lose a year. Yeah. So in that calculation, we've had 2 people in our group calculate the 120th Jubilee as being completing this year. In other words, once we start the new year, which, in our calendar begins on March 28th, which is the new moon following the vernal equinox, and that would create the first year of the 121st Jubilee and the 50th year of the 120th. Now, this may mean something or it may not, but if it means something, it's possible that it means the calculation of man's days shall be 120 years. And we know when we read in Jubilees, we get all this cryptic language about it was the 5th year of the 7th week. Wait a minute. I thought a week counted up a number of days. Well, it doesn't. It's the first week of years. That is to say that the years in the book of Jubilees are grouped into weeks of years, or 7-year periods. So the 5th year of the 2nd week, for instance, is going to be the 12th year. And so when you look at these calculations, then the question is, does Jubilees or Genesis 6:3, is that actually referring to Jubilee years? And is he saying that man's days, that is to say man's dominion over the earth, will come to a conclusion at the end of 120 Jubilee years? So this calculation is quite distinct from the calculations of Daniel 9, for instance, or other calculations that you would see. It's a pretty distinct prophecy, and in this calculation, then it looks to the idea that, and then when we talk about the 3.5 or 7 years on the tribulation, John, that you have here in the chart, we have to remember that we have our ideas about what's written in the book of Revelation. And then, of course, the world kind of changes it up as we begin to see new things in the book constantly, which we saw, of course, during the period. Let's call it the period, the non-essential period. During that period, we saw some very interesting things that became well illustrated in the book Hazon. So when we look at these ideas, there is a 7-year period that is described clearly. I shouldn't say clearly. It appears to be a 7-year period described in Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about a sign being seen in the heavens. And and again, this is a cosmological sign. We know that Genesis 1:14 directs us to use the greater light, the lesser light, and the stars also for signs, seasons, days, and years. And then Revelation 12 begins with, and I looked and saw a wonder in heaven. I saw a sign in heaven. And I saw a woman, clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, with 12 stars in her hair. Well, this appears to be a cosmological dating, giving birth to a male child. And in this case, she was giving birth to Jupiter. This sign was seen once before in history. It was during the time of the birth of Mashiach, when this same woman, Virgo, was giving birth to the star Venus, which in Hebrew is Shachar, and the Ben Shachar, the morning star, right? The Shachar. And this time it was giving birth to Jupiter, which Jupiter in the Hebrew is Sadiq, or the just. And so with this being, is this the scales that are going to be balanced, right? When the Lion of Judah returns, he's going to come back to bring justice to the earth. And so at any rate, Hasatan makes war in heaven with Michael during this period for 1,260 days. The 1,260 days the woman is sequestered in the wilderness. Then he is cast to the earth, and knowing his time is short, and he makes war with the saints, those who have the testimony of Mashiach and are guarding the commandments. And this period takes place for a time, times, and a half a time, which is regularly construed as 42 months, which would be 1,260 days if you were talking about a 30-day month, which is what Daniel appears to be discussing. 1,260 days equated to time, times, and a half a time, similar to Noah's calendar, where he's on the boat for 5 months. 150 days is the 5 month, is how it's calculated in Genesis 10. So here you can kind of see that this is a 7-year period that shows the war in heaven initially for half of that period. And then the other half is going to be a war on earth. And so when you see that period, I think that period began on September 23rd, 2017. And actually, you don't start the count until October 1st, because on October 1st is when the male child will be presented. And October 1st was the day that we had that massive shooting in Las Vegas, where there were allegedly 55 people killed, which was coincidentally on Yom Kippur, a blood sacrifice on Yom Kippur. Then we would go from there, 1,260 days, which puts us to Biden's order mandating the jab in March of 2021. And that would terminate in August of 2024. August 25th of 2024, that period of time would end. Now, after that period of time, what happens? Well, there appears to be, shall we say, a gap. And the gap is leading up to what we see now is the beginning of the 121st Jubilee. And in the 121st Jubilee, can we anticipate, and I do think that there is reason to anticipate, the rise of the beast, the proclamations of the false prophet, and in particular, there's one aspect to the beast that I think is very, very interesting, which is that in Revelation 13, it says that Hasatan will give his seat, power, and authority to the beast. The dragon will give his seat, power, and authority to the beast. And if the beast is in fact an it and not a him, i.e. AGI, artificial generalized intelligence, is the power, seat, and authority being given to AGI right now? And the answer is yes, it is. And it's being given to AGI by every country on earth. There's no objection to it. In fact, they're all racing to see who can employ the most AGI to command all the systems of governance. Now, they're talking about air traffic control right now. They're talking about aircraft. They're talking about buses. They're talking about trucks. They're talking about trains. They're talking about all government offices. They're talking about pharmacies. They're talking about retail stores and retail outlets, all being AGI governed. And so one of the elements that I see before us is the power, seat, and authority is being given over to something. It's being given over to something. And there's no objection. There's no stop to it. So will we see something manifest as we enter into the Jubilee on March 28th? Will we see something happen? Will we see the rise of the two witnesses? The two witnesses are supposed to. Will we see the trampling of the outer court? And again, is this the tribulation? I don't know. But I do think the trampling of the outer court is on tap. To give you an example, I define the outer court as those people who have faith. They've been baptized, they've confessed the name, but they have gone no farther. In other words, they still live in a secular world and a secular lifestyle, believing that they purchased fire insurance to keep them out of hell. So they're in the outer court. And being in the outer court is going to be trampled by the other nations for 42 months. Well, we can already begin to see the preliminary groundwork, the weapon in the hand of those who will do the trampling has already been created. In South Dakota, right now, the New Testament has been criminalized as anti-Semitic hate speech. And this was a bill that was passed and signed by Kristi Noem, who is now the head of Homeland Security. And this bill states that anti-Semitic hate speech is not allowed, and anti-Semitic hate speech is to be defined by this Jewish organization that will have the right to give you the complete definition. And one of the things that organization has defined is that anyone who claims that the Jews killed Jesus is guilty of anti-Semitic speech. Well, that very passage appears 3 times in the average English Christian Bible. So the New Testament now is, as a matter of law in South Dakota, anti-Semitic hate speech. This same bill in the same exact language has been passed by the United States House of Representatives. It was offered as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act and was rejected. And Mike Johnson told Chuck Schumer, you have to pass it separately. So this bill is already passed in the House of Representatives. When it passes in the Senate, the question you have to ask yourself is, will Donald Trump sign it? And if he does, then the New Testament will be criminalized as a matter of federal law in all jurisdictions in the country. I believe that's going to happen before April 1st. And from April 1st forward, you're going to see the trampling of the outer court. That is to say that the denominations of Christendom are going to be shut down as being the congregation points for those who are engaged in nonstop anti-Semitic speech.
So that fits very well into the next program we'll have on the Freemasons and things and whatever, because I think the Noahide laws, all of that, that's called Luciferian. I know Lucifer just because they worship him under that name. Because it's a biblical frame of reference, but it's what they like to call that entity. Yeah, I think that's that makes a good start to the following show. Actually, Gary, you concur with? I mean, obviously we are at that time, right? What times where things are happening that we haven't seen.
I would concur. We're in the fig tree generation. I wouldn't concur with a lot with what was just said.
Yeah.
We want to be very careful not to get too precise and too far out over our heels, lest we lose our credibility. And so using too much interpretation and then building on that with other interpretation can get you into some trouble as well. So, and it gets it into conflict with other scripture, then you have to reinvent what that says. So I would say that we're not that close yet. I think a lot of things still need to happen. We certainly have not seen the 10 kings rise, and the little horn rises amongst those kings, and they give their power to Antichrist at the midpoint. We haven't seen the sacrifices on an extremity of the temple yet. We haven't seen the rise of Babylon and its rule and its tribulation yet. We have events that we need to consider that are in a chronological order that, and again, some people will disagree that Jesus put his chronology and template down in Matthew 24, 13, Luke 17, and 21 in chronological order, except that it says it's in chronological order, whether it's in Greek or it's in English, when you use the word tota and then as those types of events. And that the revelation is Jesus's testimony given to the angel to show in vision to John. So it has to fit with that chronology. And it does, if you permit it. So if we don't try and get sort of over analyzing on the events, you can sort of get a consistency and take conflicts out, and you're not having to sort of reimagine what something might say. So we're in line directionally, but we're not in a shorter version. And I'm not even saying it has to be, as I said in my comments, that, you know, it could be within another 10 years or so, or it could be even a little bit longer, because these events have to happen. And Jesus was very specific. He said, all of these things that I have said are going to take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So we want to make sure that those events, we kind of let them unfold and not get ahead of prophetic chronology. So, but I do think there's going to be a lot of things that happen quickly. There's a lot of common denominators that I would agree in there, but a lot of the details of that, I would say we want to be very careful with.
Okay. Well, I'm I'm, let's say, since 2017, every year's been a year. So I'll be doing this for another 20 years. It's fine. Hopefully, I've got a life in between, write a book and other things. But otherwise, I'm like Stacey, I've got my Jeep packed.
Yeah. But one thing I'd like to add too, John, is a lot of times we've been taught in the church and we're looking toward that Israel over there for the temple when we are actually the temple. And if you believe that the temple has already had desecration set up in it during, the jab and all that, then you can look toward this calendar here, what's going on, that these things are playing out. So it just depends on which way you're looking.
Yeah, again, there's so many ways to take this, but in the end, right, the sixth seal comes.
Right.
Sixth seal's when, the 4 towers fall, the Kelly and John Dee and all of that stuff, right? The 4 towers fall, and the 4 towers are named. They fall at the sixth seal, and it comes as as a snare upon the world. They're not expecting it. No one's expecting it. Like, what's going on here? So whenever it is, it's going to be a surprise. Whether it be this year or in 10 years, it'll be a surprise. So anyway, let's move on.
Before we go to the next slide, John, Gary, can you give us a definition, what you refer to as the fig tree generation? You refer to it in every program we've done with you. So I'd just like you to...
okay. Yeah, so in the Old Testament, Israel is referred to as the vine in Hosea 9 and other passages, Jeremiah, I think 4, and several other passages. The southern kingdom is referred to as the figs and the fig tree. And so when Jesus walks up to the fig tree, just before he goes to the temple and gives his prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and then goes sort of immediately after when the disciples are going to ask about the, what's going to be the end time in your coming, where Jesus gives that oration of the events. He goes up to the fig tree, takes a fruit, eats it, and then kills the fig tree. And he says, he says this tree no longer is bearing fruit because they're just about to violate the covenant in the most serious way and reject their Messiah and crucify him. And so the disciples would understand who he's talking about. And then he gives the prophecy of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And then he gives his chronology thereafter. So when he says, when you see the fig tree in bloom as an overarching sign to the set of events, there's 3 overarching signs you have to apply throughout that chronology that he gives, is the days of Noah and also the sorrows. But the fig tree generation is that generation when the southern kingdom is going to be back in Jerusalem and in the land of the covenant. And this is after he has already said the temple is going to be destroyed, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and the people of Judea know what the curses of the covenant will be for that violation is the diaspora. So the disciples know this. And so that's the reference that he's giving, in my opinion. I know people will disagree with me on that. It's just that it just lines up perfectly with how he lays out the prophecies and his actions and with Old Testament prophecy.
Okay, thanks. That's just simply because you referred to it. So I wanted a definition as we go forward so we can understand that. Thank you. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide, John.
Thank you. Yeah. So this slide is the slide we had before, but again, just as an open memoir for ourselves to have a quick look through. The little red line on the right-hand side is the Adamic age, right? Like this is past 6,000 years. You can hardly see it; it's so small. You see the big blue lines kind of in the middle there that says sort of these are the lines where they claim to have found human specimens of some sort, and these are what we call the day 6 people, thinking there's maybe 2 creations of mankind, one being the day 6 which populated the earth, and Adam being then falling from Eden. So Adam is a different type of creature. He's got a divine presence in him. You have to think when he fell from the garden, what did they say? It says in Genesis 3:22, and Yahweh Elohim said, "Behold, the man has become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat of it forever." So the tree of life was his way of staying alive forever. And so you have to think, Adam's fallen from grace, he's fallen from the heavenly, or wherever you think Edom is to earth. He then lives as a mortal for 900 years. And every generation after that, apart from obviously, gets kind of less, really. Obviously, Methuselah lived, I think, perhaps a bit longer before Noah. But generally, they all went less. So you've got to think, he came from divinity. He came as an immortal by having the tree of good and evil and eating of the tree of life. So then we have to think, well, what else could there be before that? What was the lifespan of the sixth man? And we're going to go into now the Egyptian record and the Babylonian record to see what their texts really say in terms of lifespans of entities. And these entities will either be lower G gods or angels, offspring from those angels, or other creatures. But when you see the lifespans of them, I'd want to have a discussion about what we think they are, if these are the men of renown. Do we believe these records are true, or are they incorrect? So let's spin forward. Just go to the next slide. This slide we're going to do in 2 weeks, but this one is an updated version of the previous one. It kind of updates and goes through some of the antediluvian Freemasonry, which we'll be going through in 2 weeks' time. Okay, but I just put that in there for completeness. So if we go to the next slide, Jess, that'd be great. So let's go to this one then. So this is perspectives again. So I've got two versions. I've got the KJV and the Cepher version, because I like them both. Okay, so the generally accepted one in Gen 6.4 is there were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that, where the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old mighty men of renown. So there's a few things of here. You've got the sons of God, which are the angels of a certain estate. The daughters of men, you could say, well, this is going to be the daughters of Adam, right, presumably. And the men of renown would then be their offspring. The Cepher version, which I like, is there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, who also gathered afterward. When the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became warriors and tyrants, which were from everlasting, mortal men of the name. So again, that gives another kind of thought process in terms of they were from everlasting, and it gives more of a direct correspondence in terms of their actions being warriors and tyrants. Okay, you kind of start thinking about, some of the old Babylonian kings, etc., and some of the pharaohs, right? So, who were the sons of God? The Beni Elohim, immortals. Who were the children? Mortals, right? But Adam was a strange thing because he is born of clay, right? He was immortal by having the tree of life, but he became mortal by having it taken away from him. So there's a nuance there in terms of some angels might be immortal by having access to the tree of life. Some might be divinely immortal forever, right? I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if people agree with that, but it's...
anyway. What I would say, John, is when you talk about the Beni Elohim being immortal, maybe not. Like when we look at from everlasting, right? This is the Ma'olam, right? Ma'olam in the Hebrew, which can also mean from time out of mind. But when you talk about mortal men, the word there in the Hebrew is enoshi. And this is where we get the word ishi, enoshi. But it does mean mortal men. And in the KJV, they use the word renown, which comes from the word Shem, right? Which we know is the name, right? Shem. But it's also a person's renown, right? Your name is your renown, if you will. It's the fame of your character, if you will, your name. Mortal men of the name, mortal men of renown. And what is critical about this passage is that we see the Beni Elohim are the ones who come into the daughters of men. Now, maybe they were Nephilim, maybe they weren't. We have this statement, there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. And then what's so critical is that who gathered afterward. After what? The KJV says, and also after that. After what? After what? After the flood, right? After the antediluvian period. I think this is what the inference is. And then it is the B'nai Elohim who come into the daughters of men. And so the question is, who are these B'nai Elohim? Now, in your previous slide, you showed some species of mankind having the record, whether you're talking about the African record or you're talking about the Moroccan record.
Yeah.
And of course, the on that is, in my opinion, suspect, because of course it's carbon dating. And carbon dating assumes the speed of light at a constant speed, which they now know is not true. The speed of light is not and never was constant, and may have had a very rapid decline in its speed in the recent epoch. And again, we know there was a different world at the time of Noah, completely different world. A 360-day year. There were no oceans on the earth. It didn't rain. It was just kind of a dewy environment and so forth. It was a different world. And it probably had a different atmosphere. And, people lived many, 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 many years longer. They lived 1,000 years practically, right? So it was a different world. And these B'nai Elohim, it's a question who they were. And is there any evidence of them today? And there may be evidence of them today. There may be genealogical evidence of them today. This, we've got an incredible megalithic record that indicates a whole ton of things that are pre-Adamic. And it's very hard to get around those things. It's very difficult to get around the pyramids that are all over the earth, to get around the ley line contiguous seas that are all over the earth, to get around what appears to be runway markers, to get around things that are scraped on the desert floor that can only be seen, from a satellite view or from 10,000 feet or 15,000 feet. And the kinds of things that evidence potentially laser tools and cutting stones, and the transportation of blocks that weigh tons and tons and tons, the cutting of 70,000 pound granite tombs, cut perfectly square corners on the inside without a tool mark. And these kinds of things are very difficult for us to replicate in the modern epoch, but yet they are antediluvian in their time span, or appear to be anyway. So with this being said, there is a question we have to ask. There's twofold question there. One is there a sufficient record to reach the conclusion that there is a paleo record that is antediluvian in nature that goes back thousands of years before the creation of Adam? That's one question. Then the second question is Scripture silent about that? Is Scripture ignorant of the fact that happened? Okay, so I'm going to leave those questions there.
You answer my questions with more questions.
Like a European movie.
Okay, top that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's obviously it's one of the most fascinating passages in the Bible. It's just a lightning rod for all sorts of debate and things. So one of the questions I have with the Cepher is define in this application the meaning for Nephilim. Otherwise, I'm losing the context if it's. I want to know how you understand Nephilim there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Gary. This was actually something that happened to us at a conference that we were present with Steve Ben-Nun and Eli Marzulli at this conference. And Steve Ben-Nun likes to use the Hebrew, and he puts the Hebrew up on the screen quite often. And he had up this passage in Numbers 13, verse 33. And I pointed out to him at that conference that there is a distinction between the word Nephilim and the word Nephilim. And the distinction has to do with whether or not there is the presence of the extra yod in the word. Now, quite often in Hebrew, you see a noun being created by converting the vav to a yod, or adding the yod.
And by a yod, just for the audience, you're referring to like the apostrophe. Yep.
Yeah, the apostrophe like letter. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so in this particular case, this word is not Nephilim. Even though Strong wants to construe it as Nephilim, it's not. It's Nephilim. And the reason has to do with the spelling of the word. So in the spelling, so we looked at it and we said, okay, well, we looked at the difference between Nephilim and Naphalim. Naphal means to fall, the fallen. And so you're talking about the plural of Naphal, Naphalim, as compared to Nephilim, which were the children of the fallen. So the Nephilim would be the way the context we use in the Cepher is the Nephilim are the generation of those children born between the fallen watchers and the daughters of men. But that is not the assignment that's given to us here in Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, it says specifically the B'nai Elohim. That's how it puts it. Now, the B'nai Elohim you can take in a number of contexts, right? In one context, you could say the B'nai Elohim are anything created by Elohim. And most Christians accept the fact that angels were created before man, right? That there were angels created before men, that it was a class that was created before men. And so the question is, when you're talking about angel, that's really a bad word. It's malak, which means messenger. But when you talk about, for instance, certain kinds of angels, seraphim, cherubim, ophanim, these kinds of things, these are different kinds of classes of angels compared to this particular class. So the sons of the B'nai Elohim were these angels. It's possible. I'm not saying it wasn't. But when we talk about the Nephilim, we see Nephilim here, it specifically means the fallen ones. Now, the book of Hanok is going to tell us that the fallen angels did, in fact, shapeshift to have relationships with human women. That's what it says. Very clear. But at any rate, so that's what we mean in this particular case, Gary.
Yeah, I wanted to be sort of clear on that because it's kind of like it's almost what I want to do for the audience here as well is be careful with this, because this is an excuse to not from what the doctor is doing, but from what other people will use that type of translation for, to say that there weren't giants, because they'll use fallen ones as being there, and then they're saying, well, there's no reference to the giants. And so just for the record on, and I'm going to come back to this, in terms of maybe how I would prefer to see it written there. But in the original Strong's dictionary that I like to use from the 1800s versus the more condensed ones, it actually gives both spellings for it. It's an and or. And yes, when most people don't really sort of realize that as well. And I think that's because when you go back to the vowelless language, it'd be NPL, right? And there wouldn't be an A or an E there in the original one, but there's obviously an application for Nephilim as the giants somewhere within the Bible, as an extension out of that word, because it's listed. So it has to be used somewhere where it would be that extension out of the Bible. Otherwise, it wouldn't be listed. So, for Shemayim, for heavens, we don't get Shema.
Oh, no, there's no question here.
Singular, right? Let me go. So I'm just wanting to make some clarifications here. So I'm fine if it's to be understood as fallen ones, but is that now the giant as fallen ones, or is that now the angels as the fallen ones of the Shemayim, the heavenly ones? And so it changes the meaning a little bit, in terms of how you would understand 6:4, where now you have the fallen ones, as I would understand what your meaning is there. And then, they were gathered afterwards, fine. And when the sons of the Elohim came, and it's odd that it's going back to the reference in 6:1 to the sons of the Elohim, or Ben Elohim, versus Nephilim there again as fallen ones, to be sort of consistent with that. And why wasn't it Nephilim in Genesis 6:1? So I understand these are fallen angels, but what I don't want to do is lose the meaning that their offspring weren't giants. And it's interesting, you used warriors and tyrants for Gibor or Gibborim, instead of using the Gibborim there, where you're using the Nephilim there up in Genesis 6:4. With Olam and everlasting, that's one of the meanings. That's probably the most common meaning that it's translated in, but it can mean of old. It can mean of ancient times, and it's translated that way as well. But now, is that everlasting referring to the tyrants and the warriors, or is it referring back to the Elohim there, which we know are everlasting? I would say the grammar suggests that it has to be referring back to the Gibborim, which, again, I don't have a problem with, but if it's saying that they weren't initially created with an immortal spirit and an immortal body, it sort of is in contradiction with Genesis 6:3, where you're going to have that lifespan reduced to those 120 years. So then you have to sort of re-examine that verse and say, okay, well, how do I want that to make that work? So I just, for the clarity of it, as I read it, I could walk away from this and say, I'm absolutely fine with that translation. I would prefer different words, but I see openings for people to create a lot of confusion with it.
Oh, sure. Well, a couple of things, Gary. First of all, when you look at Strong's on giving you both spellings of Nephil, when you look, it tells you that it's from H5307, which is the exact same spelling, right? Which is not
Well, it's not quite the same. There's a couple accents that are a little bit different in that version at the bottom.
Yeah, and the thing is, you got to keep in mind that I don't have a lot of respect for the Masoretic preferences, so the Nikudot are not necessarily dispositive. But the thing is, when you talk about this, when you read Numbers 13:33, you have both the word Nephilim and Nephilim in the same verse. And this absolutely makes it crystal clear that the Nephilim were in fact giants, because it says in that verse, there were, the Nephilim, the children of the Nephilim, we were grasshoppers in their sight. And, to us, it was a similar disposition. So it's very clear that the Nephilim and the Nephilim concept of giants is given in that passage in 13:33, Numbers 13:33. And then when you look
people
also,
will use that argument in that sentence. That's where it happens, where these openings for these arguments come from. And we're not disagreeing that there are giants there, but they'll say that's the embellished part of the report, and it is. So they weren't really giants; they were lying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a I mean, if they want to call the scripture lies, well, they can. But the thing is that our responsibility here was not to put in something weird. The thing is that we looked at that word, and in our opinion, it was Naphal, and Naphal was fallen, not Nephil, but Naphal.
Well, and I think fallen ones can be used to describe giants as well. So we don't disagree on that either. I'm just saying it's just not as clear.
It's the nuances. I think that's the beauty of Scripture, is also the falling down in Scripture, in terms of not falling down in Scripture itself, but falling down of man's questioning. Because there's a certain amount you can, I could argue that even with a dumbed down version of if you only had the 6 books from the KJV 1611, you could still be spiritually safe from that and move forward, right? As we move forward and start questioning, we start look at the nuances of the Strong's version of things. We start whatever, then we get new gleanings and we find new roads, and our path is better, right? So I use it all the time. I use Esau all the time. So it is what it is. But I think, I
was going to say, I would also, like, the Jewish dictionaries defines that as giants, right? That word, however you want to have that for the spelling, is referencing to the giants there. So, and also Josephus recognized that verse was the creation of the giants as well, and giants in that application there. So, again, we're not really arguing on that. It's just that I want to be careful that people aren't using that to say there weren't giants, and that's my only issue there.
Yeah.
And getting to the point where we're talking about who the sons of God these were immortals. These are, I mean, sons of God as they're used in the term throughout the Old Testament, whether it's sons of the Most High in Psalms 82, or it's the sons of God in Job 1:6, 2:1, 38, 4 through 7, who were there at the time of creation. These are not humans. And even the compounded word of Israel is talking about the sons of these rulers. So these are the immortal ones. And originally the giants were immortal as well, but for a very short period of time, it would seem, because of that restriction that's put on in Genesis 6:3. So I think that we also get an interesting sort of connotation with the word of men of renown as it shows up in the KJV, and as the doctor said, you have that word as Shem, which can mean famous and infamous and of reputation and words like that, but it's also dually derived from Shemaim, of the heavenly ones. So these are the Gibborim of the heavenly ones, which again sort of underlines it. So I might have gone a little bit different if I was doing a translation from my own biases, I guess, as to just to double tap that for everybody reading it, that it's perfectly consistent all the way through, and that don't try and take the giant understanding out of that verse. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying I'm not quite as happy with the KJV translation either. So, but I'm a bit of a contrarian that way on some of these things that I think they under translate.
Yeah, I'm on board with you because the nuances can be missed. But the thing is, I think things like the Cepher, it's almost like a step up in gears from the KJV in terms of nuances and understanding. But if you want to have, for somebody that doesn't know all the ins and outs of Nephilim, etc., a plain version as your starter mode. And then
I cannot tell you how many times people get a hold of me. Some are questioning, just wanting a good answer, and others are just calling me crazy things, saying that that word giants is fallen ones there, and you can't
win whichever way you do it, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
So
exactly. I thought Genesis 1:1 was tough. What was 1:2? But let's move quickly on, please.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the confusion comes in, John, like my buddy Wesley always says, Babylonian confusion, because I heard Gary say there's no vowels in the original. However, the original is the Ivrit, so the original Ivrit has vowels. His name is Yod He Vav He, which are 4 vowels according to Josephus.
So it's
So it just depends on where you get you go to get the information,
or how old the language is as you go back to the original Hebrew, as it derives off of Semitic, and the original Semitic is vowelless. So depending on when you make that segregation.
Yeah, cut the line exactly. Okay, let's Babylon. Just how old? Let's move on, Jess. Next slide, quick. Accelerate. So, hey, this is interesting. Again, it's like one of these pub teasers, right? So, the Babylonian system base 60. What the heck does that mean? Well, you got 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. You got 360 degrees in a circle. Base 60 actually makes more sense than you might think. And I just want to get a couple of things across here, because I've heard a lot of comments online and bits and pieces about, these Babylonian dates, must have got it wrong. They've forgot it's base 60 and it's not base 10. So they've got all the digits wrong. You're 60 times out of date, etc., whatever. I want to just highlight a few things. The first thing is, I can read 1 to 50 in front of me now, right, with that translation. I can also read at the right-hand side and say 110, 6600, 3600, 36,000. Now, a few obvious things about this writing. This is the cuneiform, right? It's done with a spatula, so it's very easy to write quickly and to have very simple numbers. First thing I notice is in hours, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and naught, right? So we've got 10 characters to define our numbering system. So they've got 5. If you look on the right-hand side, you've got 1 as a vertical stroke, then you've got 10, 60, 600, 3,600, and then it becomes repetitive again. So 36,000's got a bit of a 10 in the middle of the etc. So it's a very simple system. It's got half the digits we have, and it goes right across. The second thing to notice is it escalates very dramatically as 1, 10, 60, 600, 3,600, 36,000. So, and because it's all character spaced, if you miscalculate space, don't see a space there or whatever, or misread it, or it's a bad printing of the thing, or it's been damaged, right? Your clay tablet's been chipped to something, you could get the number wrong by 36,000 or 3,600. So you can be out. So so first thing is I want to say is I don't think the original translators of this were stupid. I think they knew it was base 60. It's been written, it's all over the internet, it's on here. Secondly, if I can translate this now in 10 seconds or 10 minutes, looking at this, I'm sure any of us could look at a tablet now and start reading through a number, right? If you just work on spacing. So I think let's look at the tablets. Let's go on to the next slide, if you don't mind. I'm not trying to dumb it down. I'm just trying to get through the arguments. So this is the Weld Blundell Prism, the Sumerians' king list. Okay, prism was founded in 1922 in an expedition in Lhasa in modern-day Iraq by British archaeologist Herbert Weld Blundell. You can see it in front of you there. It looks pretty damaged, right? This thing's like a box stood up. It's got 4 sides, and you can read each side. And first thing was I didn't realise until I read it. It says the Sumerian kings list is known from a number of different sources, all in the form of clay tablets or cylinders, and is written in Sumerian. At least 16 different tablets and fragments containing parts of the composition are known. So there's not only one, there's 16 of them. So if it's wrong on one, it's wrong on 16, right? Or there's something wrong. So it's like one of these that, okay, it's half missing there, but actually, you know what? There's 15 other copies somewhere, partial ones, obviously. Okay. So then, moving on from there, we can have a look at the columns 1 and columns 2. So you can see 1 and 2 on the clay, and on the right you can see 1 and 2. A couple of things on this is the start of the king list. It starts right at the top in red, and it says rulership which from heaven descended as the first row. Okay, on column 1. At the very end of it, in yellow, it says the deluge came upon the land after the deluge had come, and then it has a reincursion or something saying the rulerships which descended from heaven. So in this chronology, if it is a chronology, and it's on the same tablet, it's not 2 different tablets, it's 1 and 2 on the same face of the same tablet, so I've got to imagine they're together and it's chronological, going left to right instead of right to left, I assume. I don't know, but let's assume that. Then you'd see you've got 2 incursions on line 1 and line 41. And then you've got a deluge on line 39 and 40. And then it tells you right at the end how long they all lived. Okay, that's hard to read on here. But on the next slide, I've got some dates. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so the first tablet's on the top. I'll just read the first bit of it. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridug. In Eridug, Alulim became king, and he ruled for 28,800 years. Alajar ruled for 36,000 years. 2 kings, they ruled for 64,800 years. So, a couple of things here. One is the ridiculously long dates, but the 20,800 and 36,000 add up to 64,800. So that adding works base 60, and it's a self-qualifier. Okay. We can go further down, but the first set of kings, the first part of the tablet, ruled for 241,200 years, according to that numbering system, if it's been calculated correctly. Then there's a flood. Then the leadership came down again. This time, however, when you look at it, it says after the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kik. In Kik, Juko became king. He ruled for 1,200 years, a lot less. The next king ruled for 960, and it goes on and on. 23 kings ruled for 24,510 years. So 23 kings in 24,000 years is about 1,000 years per king, not 30,000 years. So we see a massive. Now, this is just. This might be all wrong. The calculations may be completely incorrect. But there's 16 copies of this text, and there's only so many ways you can get a dash wrong on a tablet. So it's just for comment. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about this. Anybody? If you see it before, don't believe it.
I can tell you what my thoughts are on it, John. If these were days and not years,
Yep.
all of a sudden we get a completely different roster.
We do.
Interesting.
Yep.
Right? If it's days and not years, then you would see that Laljar, for instance, who says he ruled for 36,000 years, if he ruled for 36,000 days, then he ruled for 100 years in a 360-day year. Right? And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that, you know, when I see estimates like, I mean, when you look at this roster in years, this puts their, you know, their tenure at what? 500,000 years, 600,000 years of leadership. How much are we talking about here?
No, 100%.
We've got, well, let's see, 130,000, there's 170,000, there's 200,000, there's 236,000, there's 450,000. So, okay, and I'm not to bad Tiberi yet. We're already at 450,000 years. So, is there anything consistent in the worldwide record that would give us this same record? I mean, it's possible. What do I know? Well, I wasn't there, right? I don't know. But these guys would sure appear to have eternal existence if we were talking about on the throne for 36,000 years, right? If you got a bad ruler, you're stuck with him for 36,000 years. I mean, that's not good, but but whatever. The point being is that, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you're going with this particular record, but when I look at this record like this, I question the translation, frankly.
Yeah. No. So what I'm going for here is a couple of things. One is, if it's a days at the top, it'd be 660 years for the first set of kings, and obviously further low it'd be a lot less, like 66 years for 23 kings or whatever. So that could be much more realistic. However, it does specifically say descended from heaven twice, and there's a flood in between. So this could be concurrent with the Nephilim, or fallen ones, or it could be before. Okay. Gary, I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And, you know, anybody who's done any sort of looks at any of these translations, your mind kind of goes to mush. Trying to say, okay, now how do I make this work, right? But there are a couple things that we do know, and I won't be able to give a silver bullet here. But what we do know from many polytheist accounts is they have the same version, is they have 3 different kinds of reigns. And in simplistic terms, it's the reign of the gods, so the fallen angels. And then there's a reign of kings that become the demigods. And then at some point in time, generally about the flood, it's the reign of men, except that their dynasties are going to be usurped by giants and then intermarried with humans as their fertility issue sort of comes about. So you have that constant of this transition of rulership. And so it's then from that polytheist sort of side, then when would you pop in the creation of the demigods and their rule? And then how does that fit with the sort of biblical chronology or secular chronology, whichever chronology that one's going to use? And then another thing to keep in mind, and when we're talking about time in so many polytheist cultures, their times are kind of understood in cycles, just as, you know, we see the wheel as being part of their imagery. And they have many cycles. And so now what we're trying to do is trying to apply what is the cycle that they might be referring to. Is it a cycle of a solar year? Is it a cycle of a lunar month or a lunar year? Or what is the cycle that they're referring to that would be the key to making sort of these kind of numbers kind of work? Because these are even way greater than the numbers that are used in Egypt, which are longer than the secular times and the times of the rules. So there's a mismatch with that alignment. But again, I would, you know, and I've not resolved it. I haven't spent time on doing it because I might be down that rabbit hole forever. But it's what cycles are they using to define that consistent period of time that marks the reign of the kings?
Yeah. I mean, if you divide this by 6, you get down to the next record again, to which is the Egyptian record. But for me, what I'm taking out from this is they note a flood, and there's 2 incursions. There's an incursion before and an incursion directly afterwards. So
Yeah.
whatever time I'm looking at, there's a dual incursion. They say it came down from heaven twice. So that's my takeaway from this is on their record somehow the fallen ones, assuming these are fallen ones, have had two attempts at the earth.
Yeah. And that's fairly consistent in the polytheist accounts, that the first race of giants is killed in the Great Wars and is generally located before the flood. And then there's another race of giants that are created, whether it's in Greek or Sumerian. And I would say also biblically, that's how we account for giants either surviving or being reproduced after the flood. But again, there's distinctions of the kinds of giants that show up after the flood. And that word olam that we were talking about is equivalent to elam. And, as Smith and Sayce did their research, they said, the Shemites intermarried amongst an Aboriginal people there. And it seems that they took that name Elam, which is equivalent of Olam. And now you've got this puzzling Aboriginal giants there that has this meaning that could be translated as everlasting or as ancient ones or as from just before the flood. I mean, again, it's up to the person to figure out what that would sort of mean, but it does fit as we look at these types of things. This accounting does account for a second incursion, which I heavily believe in, and I leave a small crack for survival. I don't rule it out because I don't, as a contrarian, and I think I've mentioned this on other shows, I don't have that specific verse after the flood having the same type of words. I know you can get there through the meaning in Genesis 6, but I don't have that smoking gun second verse for a second incursion. But that's where I lean, because I think that's where the evidence leads us. But it's also interesting that these same polytheist accounts and the Sumerian one has survival of giants on the ark with the last king of the Larsa's king list, and you have a second creation with Enkidu and Gilgamesh going on about 6th generation after the flood. So, and then that would infer other ones might have been created before that as part of that second incursion. So yeah, this is really important stuff. And I really encourage research for people like yourselves to figure that out. And you said that I think you said you used a factor that was sort of bringing things in line, and you said that was a factor of 6.
Yeah, and I was looking at base 16, base 10, and if you do the factor of 6, it comes back into about 40,000 years, which is the next Egyptian one is the 40,000 year mark.
Yeah, that starts to align, right? So
yeah. So okay, let's move on quickly. Let's stop on this slide a second. I think it's kind of interesting, the temple at Dendera. I mean, this could be one of the best preserved temples. And, if you look at any of the glyphs inside, this temple could be dated, a couple of thousand BC up to 40,000 BC. But you see like walking snakes at the bottom. You've got jackal-headed things, and you've got the bull being worshipped in the middle there, which is kind of interesting as well. So it gets kind of it's just interesting, really. Yeah.
Well, and that goes to the different types of gods that would have ruled, right, and the different types of fallen angels. Typically, that's not a depiction of the Ogdoad gods, but you have some of those within the Ogdoad reliefs in that were the original gods in Egypt. But when we look at Anubis, that's a jackal god, right? And a howling god, as we might also understood that. And there's a god that's also, I think it's in 2 Kings 17, where the Avim are worshiping a god by the name of Nebaz, which is a barking god and has a dog or a jackal's kind of head as it's defined. So I think when we look at, and we don't get all the descriptions of all the different orders and ranks or orders of the angels in the Bible. So like we get orders that, are outside the standard watchers, like the Excusia or the Dunamis or Icarus and all the other ones that are mentioned in Greek in the New Testament, we don't get depictions of what they look like. And so did they look like men, or did they look like something even weirder? I'm thinking, I don't know whether I have it close by. I don't. But there's a passage in Pistis Sophia, which is a Gnostic gospel, that has these watchers in the pit prison. And they have these serpentine beings in there. They also have dog-headed ones. They have bear-headed ones. They have bird-faced ones. And I think that when some of these ones, like the cherubim, took a form on the earth, this is my speculation and how I rationalize it, they would take one of those faces. So you could have a bull, a human, a lion, and a bird. And you see these depictions of those types of watchers around the world. And I think they choose one of those faces to have. But with the jackals, we don't get one other than a howling type of angelic being that you could connect into the jackal, unless it's Nebaz, but we don't know which order he's from as he's defined in the Bible. But I think there's different looks to these fallen angels that ruled. Serpentine was the most common image, but there are these distinctions as well.
Interesting. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's like, Jess, you could go back one slide, Jess, just to that previous one here. Just looking, I mean, you know, it's like, oh, these guys be on drugs or something to put these on, or something like they've had a bad trip or something, or whatever, or they're very imaginative, right? Or they actually happened, they're there. Normally, I think, when you see a circle over it, there's quite a few of these with circles over their heads. It either means they're from eternity, or the gods, seemingly, from what I've read. So that bull on that thing looks like he was a god in there. If you look at some of the other reliefs, some of the snakes have little circles, some of the bird ones have a little circle, but a lot of them don't.
Well, typically you have the sun disk, and a lot of times it's cradled in the two horns, right? And so on that circle, you see all of that, but you also see something else that might be the moon there. That's sort of inside of it. So, and again, that would, as you do the dualism of that religion, you have male and female gods and goddesses, and the two horns of the bull cult, which is, you know, part of their sun worshiping cult. And it's just all imageries as you know, we even get this sort of reference with these two horns with I'm trying to think of the name, is Ashtaroth Karnaim in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants. And it means Ashtaroth, which is the parent goddess of El before the flood, and two horns. It's the city of these two horns. And it's just amazing how this imagery penetrates multiple, you know, pretty much all around the earth, with different types of imageries, both in what we see on reliefs and also in some of the language. So I think that is just reflective of the same religion that they had, and that this is the same sort of sun worshipping cult that migrated with Mizraim over to Egypt after the flood again and restarted that religion, and would have been the same religion before the flood. And, you know, Osiris is Azar, as it's understood in the Sumerian history. So just a transliteration. So but for people not familiar, watch out for that sun disk and those bulls and how they're associated. So you'll see that in a lot of different things, and it's just representing some of the most important parts of that belief system. And also understand the gods were understood as bulls, and so were their offspring as bulls, as giants. So.
Yeah, and as you said, Gary, the moon and the sun there, that represents to this day what we see on TV with the different eyes of Horus, the feminine energy and the masculine energy, depending on which eye they cover when you're watching, you know, these stars supposedly on TV.
Yeah, good point for sure.
Okay, cool. So, oh, no, that's fine. But back to that one, Jess. Back on. Thank you. So this one's just another one. Evidence on the floor here, right? I've got a couple of references to Egypt being a little bit older, potentially, than we might think. This papyrus was found by the Italian traveller Bernardino Doretti in 1820 in Luxor, Thebes, Egypt, and was acquired in 1824 by the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy, and was designated papyrus number 1874. So if you look at the middle table of it, you can see a few things there, like you can see, let's look down, you can see Set, Horus, a few names in there that we might anticipate as being sort of gods of, or low G gods anyway, of Egypt. This ancient Turin kings list is a mythical pre-dynastic reign of the gods, which at first occurred 36,620 years before Menes. Okay, therefore dating the creation to be around 39,670 BC. The king of Tyre, another reference to the same document, a different article, says the king of Tyre is mentioned in the Turin kings list. The kingdom was rejected by most modern day historians because it denotes a pre-Egyptian civilization some 39,000 years ago. So that's a bit of evidence of some sort from 3000 BC, denoting a 40,000 year timeline. Okay, just information. Any comment before we go to the next slide? Or next slide, Jess. So, okay. So we had the Earth's Mirror, I think it was. EWHAL did his book on Egypt, and he then did the Orion sort of solar plex, if you like, with the belt of Orion, the three pyramids mirroring those of the belt of Orion in the heavens, and he dated that to be about 10,500 BC, I believe. All right. So anyway, this chap Armando May did a star alignment after that. I think the first one was about 2010, 2011. This guy did it a few years later, and he's actually been on conferences with EWHAL, and basically he's pretty well known. And he did a redating, and what he actually did was he looked at the Giza complex, and he found there's a small temple to Isis, which was basically meant to, he thinks, is the altar to Isis, which fits with the planetary constellations even better. And that dates it to be 36,420 BC, as when those pyramids were put in place, not 10,500. Okay, the article's there. Anyone can read it if they want to, but it's the only event between 2000 AD and 100,000 BC that one constellation hits the skies with all the monuments in the Giza complex hitting it, not just the three pyramids. So the three pyramids hit it a few times, but with this other marker he puts in place, it only hit it once at 36,400. Okay.
Absolutely fascinating, John. I think this is, this is the kind of thing that I think is very powerful evidence for dating the creation of the monument, because virtually all the megalithic monuments that we see now have some correlation to the constellation configuration in the heavens. And even I think it was on this program, we talked about the Hoover Dam, being marked with a constellation dating to the specific hour, specific minute of its completion. And here we have something, again, where you're talking about the entire complex is reflecting this particular configuration. I think it's very persuasive evidence as to the dating of its creation. And again, this would give, it's as firm as anything we've seen about when it was created. But to say it was created in 36,420 BC is to give inference, again, to the idea that there have been cycles of inhabitation on the earth that have come and gone. And are those cycles in any kind of order? We don't know. It appears to be that there may be an order, a 7,000-year cycle span, if you will. But as we talked about before with Gary, that Genesis 1:2 says the earth became destroyed and a ruin. And that this may indicate, again, that this process of life may have been very long going, but cyclical in its nature. And that if we understand that, the implications for that, of course, are enormous, because, it gives you an idea that life comes and goes on this planet. And so this is really quite, I think this is really quite interesting. Now, it's also interesting here that you show the Giza complex as being 1/3 of the distance between the equator and the North Pole. and you've got here symbolizing natural zero for longitude. Then how do you explain Greenwich Mean Time? That's an English joke.
Gary. Save me.
Yeah, so I love this type of research and stuff like that. And, you know, it's not just the celestial astronomical alignments on certain historical dates that are important, worth it would line up on. It's also, as you say, the sacred geometry and mathematics that's encoded into it. Where you have relationships to the size of the earth and all sorts of, I mean, we have no idea how many different relationships they built into it, but science and the world tends to look at humans or giants built a lot of these megaliths and cities. And that's not what the ancient people say. They say, A, we didn't build it, our ancestors didn't build it. The giants, which they all have recollections of, didn't build it. They said the gods built it sometime, you know, before any of us showed up. And so if that's true, and it seems to be consistent with the technology that goes in it and all of the things that we can't even do even to this day as we approach the technology of the days of Noah before the flood, and that technology would have even been more advanced to build some of the stuff maybe even before that, then it starts to, as you know, as was mentioned, bring a little bit of credence. Is we don't know how long between day 7 and the Eden account is, if there's 2 creations, and I think, you know, my postulation is that there is, and then how long the earth was void for after it became ruined and without forms. So what we do know is angels are, you know, immortal, and you would think a day is like 1,000 years for them too, right? So because of that immortality and that perspective. So, you know, they could have built these things well before Genesis 1-2. And all of a sudden now you've got different things that you can look to for when the start of the rebellion might have started, where the beginning of the reigns of these gods might have happened, when they built these original megaliths, and then when that goes off to the demigods and whatever they built within that sort of time frame, and then what's built again after the flood. But most of all the great monuments and palaces and things were built before the flood. So this just sort of you know, suggests that there's a linking of the common legacy that's talked all around the Bible, that we can get there biblically, and we're not twisting things like a pretzel. We're just saying, here's what it's saying, and it's not conclusive as to do we have the right dogma, or do we have the right translation?
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. But I think it's very interesting just to open your mind at least to the prospect of the cycles of time, and that there's stuff out there we can't explain. And to Dr. B's point, one of the most accurate things based on the Hoover and this show that there's some kind of correlation. And we've got another one coming up. So let's go to the next slide if you don't mind, Jess. Almost there now. This I love, right? I didn't realize I could go back, like, you know, a long time. So I went through the Silver Belt records in Arizona over 150 years, whatever. But I found the reference to this on the internet, obviously. But I went through the Arizona Silver Belt papers, and what's interesting, in 1895, on the left, I was quite shocked. Right, I know the West Coast is you know, got a few secret society things going on, but they've got a few here. They've got like the Knights of the Pythias, got the Sonic one there. They've got Globe Lodge meets the first and third Mondays in each month in courthouse. Another one meets after the full moon. So there's like 5 different types of secret society there in the paper front page. And next to it, you got Dennis Murphy there with his cows, look, proprietor from Ireland. So, but anyway, to the point of this, on the right-hand side, there's an Egyptian dig that's been going on, and this chap, Professor Timmerman, was engaged exploring the ruins of an ancient temple of Isis on the banks of the Nile. 16 miles below Najar Difad, he opened a row of tombs which some prehistoric race of giants had. And he's saying the smallest skeleton out of some 60 or so, 60 skeletons, 60, which were examined during the time. The smallest was 7 feet 8 inches high, and the largest 11 feet 1 inch. And they had memorial tablets in great numbers. Now, I don't know where those tablets are. I don't know where the skeletons are. But there are a lot of big dudes in Egypt. All right, so what's a Steve Quayle type thing that?
There you go. Yeah. Very fascinating, though, that we, and he says we've dated this back to 1043 BC, right? And some of the discussion that's in this clip, memorial tablets were discovered in great numbers, but there was no record that even hinted that they were in the memory of men of extraordinary size. It is believed that the tomb dates back to the year 1043 or 1045 BC.
You see, yeah.
Very interesting. And of course, this record, I think in the modern world, this record's been completely suppressed. I'm not sure how you found it, but it's quite interesting that that this information comes out. And again, we have this idea that no other record supports its memory. In other words, like Gary was saying, the native people had no memory of these people. There was no memory. They appeared to have existed from time out of mind, if you will.
Yeah, good stuff. And, the presence of secret societies have been with us forever. We're going to be talking about that in future shows. But but in America, they've been very dominant right from the beginning of the creation of the United States. So, but I'll focus a little bit more on that newspaper article. And it's not uncommon to have had discoveries of giants put into newspapers. What is common is the suppression of all of these newspapers. And so I have a link, and maybe what I'll do after the show is I'll send it to you, Jessica, and if you want, you can put it up in connection with the show. But it's a link that goes to a spreadsheet of discoveries of giants, mostly in the United States, but it's got some other ones. But this is mostly an American-based one. And it'll give the descriptions of the size of the giants and other details, who found it. And also on that link, on that spreadsheet, as you scroll to the right, there's a link that takes you to the newspaper that recorded it. You can read the newspaper article like you can read this one, and it goes from about 1850 to about 1950. And the commonality of these stories is that either once the skeletons are found, the local university is called. They go out and have a look at it. Then they call in the Smithsonian, and it all ships off to the Smithsonian. And the bones are never heard from again, and there's no record at the Smithsonian, or the Smithsonian is contacted directly. They go out, same story, they take it back, and then all record of it sort of disappears. Now, the Smithsonian Institute was created by essentially Masons within the political world from the money of a dowry or an inheritance, so to speak, of a Rosicrucian who was a member of the Royal Society named James Smithson, who wanted that money to fund this society, which is basically subservient to the Royal Society, which was created in 1662 to keep education and science out of the reach and oversight of the Roman Church that science and education goes to this day. And it's Freemasons and Rosicrucians who created that society. So this is a common MO. there is way more information all around the world. There are museums all over the world that have elongated skulls. They will not put them out on display, even though they have records of them. They just remain in the back, and they get sort of classified as these OOPARTs, out of place artifacts, and they use that as an excuse to keep it out of the timeline, right? So you create this term and then just say, well, we can't really deal with it, so we won't. We'll just make them disappear so we don't have to affect our timeline or our theology on it. So interesting stuff. But yeah, this newspaper article is brilliant, and it matches up with giant sizes of that time. So, even in the time of Goliath, who's 6 cubits in a span, that's 11 feet 3 inches. That's right in there. There's one that's 5 cubits. That's a little bit smaller. That's an Egyptian giant that's recorded in the same accountings in the Bible. But you also have accounts of not Orontes, but of Achilles and other giants in Greek mythology in that sort of time zone, as secular history would lay it out. And they're about 12 feet tall. 12 feet's a pretty common size. But you have Orontes, who's a giant that Pausanias recorded, was 11 cubits tall, the skeleton, which is 19 feet tall using the royal cubit, and the same dimensions as Gilgamesh is recorded as. I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of historical references, let alone newspaper references in the last few hundred years for discoveries of these skeletons.
Gosh, fascinating. I'll look at your spreadsheet. Take it in there. Thank you. So just one last slide, Jess, and then I think we're done. So this is just thrown out there. Dr. Peel will recognize the similarities with Jeremiah's tomb and stuff. This is just a barrow monument in England, right? What I thought, I've got a lot of books on old stuff. And I picked this one up the other day, and I thought this is kind of fairly useful. On the left, you can see, this is Wayland Smithy. You can see on the map there, it's near Swindon, between Swindon and Reading and London. It's just a very, just an ordinary sort of barrow, but it isn't. If you look at the stones at the front there, you can see there's a very defined entrance. You can see how long the thing is front to back. Now, the majority of that is just earth, right? Or maybe other tombs or chambers behind it, I don't know. But on the right-hand side, you can see a cross, like a crucifix. The tunnel going front to back is the viewing tunnel, where the tunnel where the shaft of light goes down to a focusing stone at the back. The two left and right sort of arms, if you like, are the viewing places, so that people stand in that viewing place and look at the stone at the back to see when a certain glyph or whatever had been illuminated, to know the specific day of the year it would be. Typically, in terms of Jeremiah's tomb, this is used with the sun, but what's interesting here, it's with the stars. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is used for Regulus, Spica, Pleiades, Capella, Procyon, etc. And it's all dated between 3,400 and 3,800 years ago. So this puts bang in the time where, it's pre-flood, potentially. And so who's in England building this stuff to look at the stars pre-flood? Is it the good guys? Is it the bad guys? Is it just, it's not just accident, if that's the case.
Well, I can tell you one thing, they were probably covered with blue ink. Just kidding. No, it's quite interesting, when you see the ancient megalith that were there in Britain and the people that were occupying. And of course, when you look at the other prehistoric record, the fact that they found saber-toothed tiger jaws in London, right under the crown when they were, building out the basements for those skyscrapers. And they found other record that it appears that the climate was substantially different. And then you start talking about Doggerland, and all of that. You get to a point where, well, it's kind of hard to say who was here and who was roaming and, who the people were, and et cetera. But, when you look at that again, you see this idea here. One of the things you see in this particular thing, John, is that the stones used to create the gate appear to be unhewn stone.
So true. Yeah.
And that's kind of its own kind of indication. I mean, if you're talking about somebody who was sophisticated enough to use, for instance, the sighting of the Pleiades or the sighting of Spica, which, we use the sighting of Spica to conclude that we've arrived at the vernal equinox, right? And so it's very possible that this, and do you know when this tomb lights up, or when this particular thing lights up at its focus point?
No, I don't. So again, it's a bit of a grab off the shelf, I'm afraid. But what's interesting is stars, right? I say with Jeremiah, it'd be like, well, equinox, whatever it's going to be, right? So you can actually see if it's a solstice, etc., or if it's not, if it's equinox, actually start of the year, or the full feast sort of thing
Yeah.
with the sun. But with the stars, it's much fainter light. So maybe it needs to be darker, maybe it's longer, maybe there's some other dynamics there. I need to do a bit more reading about it, to be honest. So I've done the sun lighting I can get, moon lighting I can also get, because even though it's much harder to predict because the moon's a weird object
Right.
and it's fast moving, the stars are faint but they're slow, right? So you'd think it'd be more predictable, but I need to do some more reading about it personally. I don't know if you know anything.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And the dating is really interesting. And I look at a couple of things. One is that there were stories that we have that come out of Gnosticism and the secret societies that Enoch, son of Cain, and Cain, they traveled around the world, and they were responsible for the construction of building sites. And so Cain is kind of associated with Tara in Ireland, and Enoch, son of Cain, is more associated in Masonic history with England in terms of his effect there. And so a lot of people will attribute Stonehenge to Enoch. And that may be just their assumption, but that's just what some of their historians have set forward. But in this site here, this is kind of different. So I wonder whether or not some of the Sethite line may have, worked itself around the world, and the ones who are followers of God, because it's the unhewed stones there that is kind of one of the requisites that for the worship of God, versus worked stones, which is done in polytheism. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting.
It's true, actually. When you go Oxford, Cambridge, it's very, very workstone. Everything is perfect. All the cathedrals perfect.
Yeah. And so the other interesting thing is one of the, again, coming from the Gnostics, but we have to understand that Adam had knowledge, and he passed that on to the Sethites as well. And according to Josephus, they weren't as much of a proponent of developing all of the sciences, although they were familiar with them, but not in the same way as what the Cainites were. But astronomy was something they had to have for their agrarian society, and they were specialized in that, not in astrology, but in astronomy. And that this might line up as well for a Adamite, Sethite lineage of people that may have been honoring the God of the Bible at that time.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, well, I can go visit that as well. It's not very close, but I get there in half a day. Okay, very good. All right, I think we're done. So wrap. Stop.
That was wonderful. Thank you, John. You brought so much. Your slides are always very, very thorough, and they amaze us all. You can see that by here on the panel as well as in our live chat, and how it draws out Gary and Stephen is fantastic, and greater understanding on even things like technology in the days of Noah. I hadn't actually considered it to that extent, so it just brings different threads together. And just hearing the whole projection.
It's so important to get the second witness, and having these two great characters on, both the great minds, both of decades of great study, is really important for that, because otherwise it can be monotone, and you think, oh, you just take it for granted, but actually no, you scrutinize it, hold it to the light and see, does it shake? And it does, so that's what I'm enjoying about these programs personally.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I got to say, your slides amaze me. You get that much information packed into that slide, it's absolutely mind-boggling.
I'll try.
I get afraid of anything less than a 24-point font, and then,
that's the only thing struggling with the site, yeah. Oh, that's excellent. No, this is wonderful. Look, you know, this is really great. You're back. We're back with Gary again in 2 weeks. There is a part 2 to this. He thought we wouldn't get through these slides. We would get through these slides, and so he sent very shortly before we started another set.
We've got to work out if you want to go further back to the primordial side, or whether go straight onto the Masons now, because I think the antediluvian Freemasonry would be kind of interesting. That's something we'd learn a lot from, I think.
Yeah, we need the theme from 2001 Space Odyssey if we're going to do that. We've got to get back there, get Monolith up there going.
I love that. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, this is fantastic. I want to just thank every one of you for being part of this discussion, both in the chat and here on the panel. I would like to remind you that we're coming up to Pesach, and so let me actually just share the screen if I can. So that you can continue to come in and register. So you've got all the details here if you go to the website, and then you can see we've got 58 days. That frightens me every time I see it, that it's going over and over. And then it's starting from the 11th to the 20th April. Different countries coming together, something really, really special. The schedule is being filled in. These are the dates that we are providing lunches, meals for the specific feast. But of course, there's going to be a big schedule together with scripture reading and speakers and so on, and actually just celebrating Passover. Eden Rise, you can see here that middle picture is a beautiful, beautiful prayer dome. And on the 16th of April, we are traveling to that area. And literally, there is no exaggeration. The views are as you see them. I've been there and I've seen it for myself. And it probably will be even far greater now because it was in construction and that area is completed. And we're going to be having the celebrations there for that day. And these are ministries that we're working together with. So all the information is here so that you can exhaust that. But, you know, right now we are coming to that time where we need to plan together for this and get it sorted out. So, you know, I just urge you to please come and join with us for that and to make the contact for it. So much going on. The different Cepher classes now throughout the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, different classes, and you can get more information by going to cepher.net. On Thursday, Dr. Pidgeon does the Cepher Moments. So for us, that is 1 o'clock in the morning in the UK, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you know of the rest, the times for that you work it against that for your clocks. And then so much going on. Of course, on a Sunday, we do a Hebrew course, which is complementary to what Stephen is doing. But we're starting from a more basic level so that we can really appreciate where Stephen goes with his. And it just rolls. And, you know, we've got different programs going on. We do this so that we can just be here and help work through these times. So Drew, why don't you take us out in prayer, please? And then we'll release everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. Heavenly Father, Yahweh, thank you for allowing us to gather here together as an assembly to praise your name and to witness some of the mysteries that you've left with us on this earth. Heavenly Father, we say a prayer over this broadcast that it was a blessing. We ask that anything that maybe have been an error to fall away and to let the truth shine bright. Heavenly Father, thank you for all of the appointed feasts that you've given us. We know that they are an appointed time of joy, and we are looking forward to gathering in the spring to celebrate your new year with one another and to throw out the old leaven and to begin a new year with fresh leaven and fresh eyes and fresh perspectives. Heavenly Father, I continue to pray for the rulers of this world, that they turn from their good ways, seek your face, and to truly know you. And I want to thank you, Heavenly Father, for the opportunity to be a part of your wonderful creation, to get to experience life with all of its ups and downs. And I look forward to the return of Yahusha. In his mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. And with that, we release you. We love you. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Take care. Enjoy your evenings or whatever time zone you are in. And thank you again, gentlemen, for being here today. Such an outstanding presentation. John, for all your hard work. Very hard for you this week, I know. So thank you so much for doing that. Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Boom.